Well, it's that time of year, that's right, it is lawn renovation season. Today I'm going to be doing some things that I probably really haven't done to my yard before. I'll be explaining all that and plenty of fun coming up. Well, fun for me, I don't know about fun for some people who might consider this to be torturous work, but I'm going to enjoy it. I put this cartridge in last night, but this is the Verticutter. But in general, my bluegrass on this side yard, the bluegrass-ryegrass mix, especially when you're mowing it really low, it definitely starts to get so dense and so thick. That bluegrass forms such a thick sod that it's not really growing up anymore. It's starting to grow into itself, and it forms such a layer on there that your mower kind of floats over top of that. And what this does is it's going to go along and cuts through some of that thick sod so that you can actually start to let it breathe again. And we'll also be going through with a scarifier on this thing as well to kind of clean out some of that dead stuff that happened during the summer. I always like to do that during this part of the year just to remove some of that dead material. Now I realize that most of you aren't going to have this specific tool that I'm using today, but you can use either a power rake to do something similar, but probably the closest thing you could rent if you were looking to do a process like this would be some sort of slice seeder. And that'll have blades that'll slice into the turf like this would, but usually you'd be putting seed in after that. You could use it for that as well if you were going to be doing some sort of overseeding or something like that. But that would probably be the closest tool to what I'm going to try to do today if you were looking for something to rent or something similar in terms of the process. Now normally I would put the grass catcher on there so that I'm not making a huge mess, but I just wanted to kind of show you what it looks like when the blades are working. You can see it here in the soil. You can kind of see how it slices into the soil. I have it set so that it's cutting down a decent amount. So I'm just kind of trying to cut through that thick sod. Well, first round done. Got already filled this entire bag. I think now I will go across it in a different direction, so I'm just going to cut it kind of at a 45-degree angle. One other thing to mention with this specifically is that I never did this on any of my tall cut bluegrass. Usually that stuff would also get pretty thick after a few years, and that's really when I would just thin it out and it'll come back stronger than ever. But this over here at 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, it's a little bit of a different animal, so just wanted to kind of explain that too. If you have some taller cut turf, you might operate things just slightly differently than what I'm doing on that stuff over there. But bluegrass will just, no matter what height it is, it will definitely get really thick. And at some point it kind of likes to be thinned out. So just one more section here to do of bluegrass on the north side of my house. I'm not gonna do the ryegrass. It doesn't have quite that same sort of density. This bluegrass is only a couple years old, but it's starting to get to that scenario where it could use a little bit of work on this side as well. That does it for the north side of the house. This is definitely a lot thinner than that other side. Like I said, it's only a couple years old, and it is on the shaded side of the house. It's probably not quite as aggressive over here. And I have ryegrass mixed into that other one, so you got two grass types there. We're gonna go with the scarifier now, clean everything up, and see how it looks after that. All right, time to switch out cartridges now. This is gonna act more like kind of like a comb to go pick up some of that debris that's still left on the surface, but also if you just kind of set it to go just down to the surface of the grass, it will take out most of that dead debris from the summer and things that died off without being too aggressive. You can set it more aggressive as well if you wanted to kind of dig down, but I'm using that cutter today to do the more aggressive work for me. Right, so this is always when I get to the tough part, because this ryegrass This time of year you can see it's really starting to recover, even with a couple days of cooler temperatures and a couple of nights down around 60 or so. It really recovers quickly. And then I need to come in and kind of do some things to it that need to be done, but I really don't want to just when it gets to this point because it looks so good already, and that renovation stuff needs to be done, but it takes a couple weeks to recover from that. But it's all kind of part of the deal. So today I don't plan to go too aggressive on this thing. I'm just gonna clean it out a little bit. Nothing too aggressive. Then tomorrow we will aerate everything and start getting sand on here. But again, even with the sand, I don't plan to go too aggressive on this one just because it's fairly smooth already. There's a few spots that high spots and things like that, but that part doesn't bother me as much as I just want it to be pretty smooth overall. I don't need to make it laser flat, but we'll do our best with that too. So now what I usually do is take it down to about a half an inch or so, the height of cut. I have been at 3/4 of an inch, but I take it down so that I can get the sand on there and then let the height come back up just slightly so that I'm not mowing back down right into the sand at the same height that it's at right now. You guys have seen me mow about a million times. I probably won't film all of that stuff, but I'll show you the after results. Day 2 of the fun today, we are going to be aerating. I like to do this about once a year for sure, especially when you put down sand, and getting a core aeration done once a year at least is a good idea, and then more sand will be going down to smooth everything out again, doing this whole process over and over, but it does make a huge difference. Let's get to work. So luckily today I have help because this gets to be a lot of work. So Will, my neighbor's over here helping, and Kelsey's out here helping as well, so we can get this done faster. And this aerator works pretty well. The only thing I would say about it is that it doesn't go down into the ground maybe as far as some of the other ones that kind of are ones that roll along. This is like the hydraulic type, so it's poking holes. But it's so much easier to use on your body that the trade-off there is what it is. So you can kind of decide what you want to use, but that's what we're using today. It's what I used last time as well. It doesn't tend to tear things up quite as much turf-wise, but that's kind of what's going on. So you might have noticed that Will is following behind the aerator, picking up cores as we go. So you can do this by hand, but it's a lot easier if you have some sort of machine like this that can just go behind, pick up the cores, and that way you don't have to rake them up by hand. But in a general lawn situation where you have taller turf, and you're not doing any sand leveling or any leveling afterwards, you're going to leave those cores on there, and you'll see them break down in about 2 to 3 weeks time or so. So if you're in a situation like me though with low cut turf, you don't want those cores laying on there to create another bumpy surface, but also when you're doing sand leveling afterwards, that sand always needs to be on the top layer. You don't really want to incorporate these two things together, so you want to remove those cores, put the sand over top of everything, let the sand fall into those core aeration holes as well, and this is creating your sand cap. So I think I have the aerating done, and now it's time to begin the fun part of the sand. For some reason, the place that I rented that top dressing machine last year decided to sell off all their rental equipment. They never even asked me if I wanted to come rent that thing again this year, which I was going to. So unfortunately that's not available. Did find one more of them, but it's not available this weekend. So I'm gonna try to get some of this done by hand and see what I come up with. And then if I absolutely have to next week go get it, I will go get that. But I think for the most part, I can probably find a way to get this done. So what I think I've learned with the sand as well is it works a little better when you don't put it down too heavy. So I think for me, I tried it again this other way where I put some buckets of sand down, then tried to spread it out, but it gets really heavy really fast. So on this section over here though, I did decide that I wanted to try it a little heavier this year, see if my theories there kind of work, and yes, it is more difficult to get it to not smother when you put it down so heavily at first. Now I was going to be overseeding this area with new seed, so I wasn't concerned if I did have a few areas that were smothered, but I wanted to kind of learn the process and see what works best for me. With the leveling tool, you can see I'm just gliding over these areas, pushing the high spots into the low spots so the sand settles into those lower areas. And you'll just go across the yard here very lightly, gliding across everything and just creating a nice smooth surface. So the other thing that you can do once you have that sand down is let it completely dry out and then go ahead and broom it in. Brooming it in will just push it down into the canopy a little bit more. You have more of those grass blades come up. That way this grass will be able to kind of recover. Whatever is covered in sand here for bluegrass or ryegrass, if it's covered in an inch of sand, you don't see any grass blades, then you need to either broom that in or decide that you're going to seed over top of it, because it's going to have a hard time coming back through that sand. If it's completely covered in sand, you don't see any more grass blades, you need to either broom that in or you need to put some seed on top of it. So the next morning I was out to work on this front renovation section. So this was a complete renovation. This one I need to completely scalp down now with the mower, pretty much as low as I can get it to go. Then I'll also come through and thin it out with the scarifier. So same type of process here, even on the dead material. You want to make sure that if your grass was pretty thick, even when you killed it off, then you need to thin it out again, even when it's dead, to make sure that the seed will get down to the soil layer. Back to the front yard section, what I also noticed that even though I had gone through it with the scarifier a couple times, I could notice that there was still some debris in there that I thought could come out of there. So I went over it a couple more times. Will helped me to pick up the clippings this time with my rotary mower instead of filling up the basket on this mower just over and over again. It does fill pretty quickly if you have a lot of debris. So sometimes it's easier to just use a rotary mower and a bagger and to clean up all that debris. But I did go over it a couple more times. You can see here the after results now. Everything's pretty good and thinned out on some of the damaged areas. Otherwise, overall though, I like the way that this is looking at this point. So the front section I'm going to start working on over here. I'm going to start going a little lighter on the sand. Now this section out here is obviously completely reno, so I'm not as worried about smothering anything. That's not a huge issue, but I also don't want it to be like 3 inches in some areas and have a hard time moving it around. So I'm just going to try it in lighter layers first. Back to the sand and how I was putting it on. This time I decided on the front yard, since I wanted a light layer, I was going to kind of mimic what that top dressing machine does. So the top dressing machine puts down a nice even but pretty light layer of sand on everything when I used it last year. So this time it is more work, but I went and did this by hand. I'm throwing this by hand here, kind of flinging it onto the ground, but this way it's not going down in huge piles that I have to spread out. It's going down in a much lighter layer. Once I had that front yard covered with a light layer of sand, will help me to move this down into the canopy by using leveling tools. This again, just gliding over the surface, is going to push the sand down into those lower spots where you want it to go. Then he and I spent probably a little more time than we should going over very small details of the front yard. Little low spots here and there we'd add just one little scoop of sand to. He would help me kind of see those and fix those. And that's what we did to make sure that everything is pretty much as smooth as we can possibly get it right now without smothering a whole bunch of stuff, even though I will be overseeding. So throughout this whole process, people are probably asking, why are you using sand? But I'm using 100% sand just because I know what I'm getting out of it. I know how it's going to react on top of my soil by creating a sand cap. Once you start mixing with other materials and you get different particle sizes, different types of materials mixing together, you just don't know exactly what you're going to get out of those. So for me, I like to use 100% sand in this process, and even though I am overseeding, you can seed right on top of that sand. Now it's going to be slightly more difficult. You have to keep up with your watering. You have to watch your nutrient levels because you're going to be adding more nutrients to this instead of it pulling from a native type soil that probably has some nutrients in it already. But sand does the best for leveling properties, as well as it has larger particle size, so it can help with the drainage. There's just a lot of different benefits to it, but if you're not interested in that whole process, you're more of a beginner and you want to still use something like a topsoil, that's totally fine. You're still going to get some leveling properties out of it. It will still work. But for me, with the sand, I kind of know how to manage the things going forward with it, and it does a better job of leveling. I let the hottest part of the day go by, and then I started my seeding process on this renovation area behind my shed. This is going to be real mowed tall fescue. That's at least the plan right now. So I did put sand back here and leveled everything with sand, and I'm seeding right on top of that. And yes, I do have the correct bag this time. I pretty much did the edges by hand, and then after I put that down, I also rolled it in with my roller just to lightly press that into the sand layer. So all the front areas were getting ryegrass, of course, and some of it was just going to be overseeded, like the side yard. The front section is a complete reno that was getting 100% ryegrass, and then my front yard is just getting an overseed of ryegrass again. So you're probably thinking these areas look really rough compared to what your yard looked like before you started all this process, and like I told you, you kind of have to have the pain before you get the gain again. And that's not a fun process necessarily when everything's looking pretty good, but sometimes it has to be done. So I wanted to show you though, this is 6 days after the initial work that I did. You'll kind of see how quickly things recover, especially with ryegrass growing in. I will be doing an actual mowing here actually very soon, probably in the next day or two. I'll be showing you that process and how far things have come along already in just 7 or 8 days by the time we do that mowing. I hope that explained a little bit more about my sand leveling process. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.